When we think of the weapons that won World War II, our minds conjure images of technological marvels and overwhelming force. We picture the screaming dive of the P-51 Mustang securing air superiority over Europe, the earth-shattering roar of the Soviet Katyusha rocket launchers, or the unstoppable advance of the Sherman tank brigades. We focus on the visible instruments of destruction, the steel and explosives that shattered enemy lines and reduced cities to rubble. These were the decisive factors, or so the classic narrative goes. But this perspective overlooks a more fundamental, more human truth. The most potent weapon in the American arsenal was not a machine of war, but a miracle of logistics. It was silent, unassuming, and arrived not in a crate marked secret, but in a humble, waxed cardboard box. The United States' true secret weapon was something far more basic, yet infinitely more powerful: the ability to feed its soldiers not just enough to survive, but enough to thrive. The concept of a secret weapon is ingrained in the mythology of warfare. The Germans had their V-2 rockets and jet fighters, technological leaps that inspired awe and fear. The Allies scrambled to counter these threats, pouring resources into their own advanced projects. But while the world was fixated on the race for superior technology, the United States was perfecting a different kind of advantage, one rooted not in the physics of destruction, but in the biology of human performance. This advantage was the scientifically engineered field ration. It was a weapon that operated on a different axis entirely. It didn't kill the enemy directly, it made the American soldier stronger, sharper, and more resilient than his adversary. It targeted not the enemy's front lines, but his stomach, his mind, and his will to fight. Consider the fundamental reality of combat. A soldier is a human system, a biological engine that requires constant fuel and maintenance. A soldier weakened by hunger is a liability. His aim wavers, his reaction time slows, his decision-making becomes impaired, and his morale plummets. He becomes vulnerable to disease, and his body begins to consume its own tissue for energy. An army of such soldiers, no matter how brave, is an army on the path to defeat. The leaders of the Axis powers, particularly Japan, fundamentally misunderstood this. They believed in the supremacy of willpower, the idea that a warrior spirit could overcome material lack. The American approach was brutally pragmatic. They understood that courage is a finite resource, and it is quickly depleted in a starving, exhausted body. Their secret weapon was designed to replenish that resource daily. This weapon didn't require a secret laboratory, it required the full, unstoppable might of American industry and agriculture. It was produced not by specialized engineers in isolated bunkers, but on factory lines in the American heartland, on farms across the Midwest, and in processing plants from coast to coast. The true secret was the seamless integration of the nation's economic power directly into the hands of the individual infantryman. Every can of stew, every bar of chocolate, every packet of coffee represented the culmination of this effort. It was the physical manifestation of their arsenal of democracy, not as a slogan, but as a tangible, edible reality. When a German soldier opened a can of bland, nutrient-efficient Wehrmachtseintopfgericht, armed forces stew, or a Japanese soldier tried to stretch his meager bowl of rice, they were consuming the limited output of economies stretched to the breaking point. When an American soldier opened his K or C ration, he was consuming the boundless abundance of a nation operating at its peak. The difference was not merely culinary, it was strategic. The ration was the great equalizer, and later, the great advantage. It ensured that the American soldier, from D-Day to Okinawa, entered every firefight with his biological systems operating at peak efficiency. He was better fueled, better stimulated, and better motivated than the man he was fighting. The myth of the secret weapon has always been about a single, war-winning invention. The truth is far more profound. The secret weapon was a system. A system that recognized the simple, often ignored fact that wars are won by soldiers, and soldiers are human beings. The P-51 Mustang was a magnificent tool, but it was the well-fed, alert pilot in the cockpit who made it lethal. The Sherman tank was a formidable force, but it was the crew, sustained by coffee and full stomachs, who operated it effectively for hours on end. The real secret wasn't a specific piece of technology, it was the deep, institutional understanding that the most critical piece of military hardware is the soldier himself, and that the best way to maintain that hardware is not with oil and grease, but with protein, carbohydrates, and a carefully calibrated dose of morale. The unassuming ration box was the delivery mechanism for this understanding, and in the end, it proved to be more decisive than any tank or plane. It was the weapon that fueled all the others. To understand the revolution, one must hold it in their hands. To comprehend the shock it delivered to enemy soldiers, we must unbox it ourselves. The K-ration was not merely a collection of foodstuffs, it was a self-contained life support system, a masterpiece of industrial design and nutritional science compacted into a single, waxed cardboard box. Its very anatomy reveals a philosophy of war that was utterly alien to America's adversaries. Let us dissect this game-changer, component by component, and uncover the logic behind its creation. The first layer of its genius was its packaging. The box itself was a marvel of practicality. Made of sturdy, wax-impregnated cardboard, it was designed to be water-resistant and durable enough to withstand the brutal conditions of a global war, the humidity of Pacific jungles, the sands of North Africa, the rains of Western Europe. It could be submerged, dropped, and roughly handled, and its contents would remain protected. This was the first clue: the Americans had engineered their rations to defeat the environment, ensuring their soldiers would not. Opening the box revealed not a haphazard assortment, but a meticulously organized inventory of sustenance. Each item was individually wrapped, sealed, and purpose-built. This was not a meal, it was a toolkit for survival and performance. The contents were divided into 3 units: breakfast, dinner, and supper, each tailored to the metabolic needs of a soldier at different points in the day. But for the infantryman in the field, these distinctions often blurred into a treasure trove of options. Let us examine the core components that made up this portable arsenal of energy. The foundation was the main course, contained in a small, key-open tin. This could be meat, hash, with beans, chopped ham and eggs, or a processed, cheese product. These were not gourmet offerings, but they were dense, caloric powerhouses. The hash, for instance, was a thick, moist cake of meat and legumes, packed with protein and fats, designed to provide long-lasting energy for a man on the move. It was pre-cooked and ready to eat cold, a critical feature for a soldier who might be pinned down or on a long patrol without the luxury of a fire. The cheese product, while alien in taste and texture to many, was a concentrated source of fat and salt, 2 commodities desperately needed to replenish what the body lost through sweat and exertion. Alongside this was the hardtack biscuit, or biscuit, square. These rock-hard crackers were engineered for shelf stability and durability. While unpalatable on their own, they served as a vital source of complex carbohydrates, a slow-burning fuel to sustain energy levels over hours of marching or fighting. They were the logistical backbone, the simple, reliable base upon which the rest of the ration was built. Then came the true strokes of psychological and physiological genius. Their D-ration chocolate bar was a weapon in its own right. This was not the sweet, creamy candy of their home front. It was a special formulation, high in fat, low in sugar, and deliberately bitter. Its purpose was twofold. First, it was a highly compact, calorie-dense emergency food, designed to provide a quick burst of energy and stave off hunger in extreme situations. Second, the caffeine content, added as a stimulant, was a direct intervention for a soldier's cognitive state. It was a tool to combat fatigue, to sharpen alertness, and to provide a mental edge when it was needed most. This was fuel for the brain, not just the body. The inclusion of instant coffee was another masterstroke. It provided the familiar ritual and cognitive boost of a hot beverage, but with revolutionary convenience. A soldier needed only a source of water, not necessarily even hot water, to reconstitute it. This offered a moment of normalcy, a tiny piece of civilian comfort, and a powerful stimulant to maintain vigilance during a night watch or before a dawn attack. It was a subtle but powerful reminder of the world they were fighting to return to. The accessories completed the system. The pack of cigarettes, typically Lucky Strikes or Camels, was standard issue. Beyond the nicotine's calming effect, they provided a social ritual, a way to pass tense, idle time, and a small, personal comfort in an environment devoid of such things. The chewing gum helped maintain oral hygiene and relieve stress. The packet of sugar cubes and fruit bar or hard candy offered a rapid hit of glucose for an immediate energy boost, a direct counter to the crashing fatigue that follows extreme physical exertion. Even the small packet of salt was a critical, thoughtful addition to replace electrolytes lost through sweat in the tropical heat, a physiological detail many other armies overlooked. Every item had a defined purpose. Every component, from the main course to the accessory pack, was a cog in a machine designed to optimize human performance. Unboxing the K-ration was to unbox a complete system. It was a system that said, "We have considered your every need, your hunger, your energy, your alertness, your morale, and your basic comfort." Its anatomy revealed an army that saw its soldiers not as disposable pawns, but as high-value assets worthy of the most sophisticated logistical and scientific support. This was the game changer. It wasn't just what was in the box, it was the profound, demoralizing message it sent to the enemy: "We can take better care of our one soldier than you can of 10 of yours." To view the American field ration as merely a collection of food items is to miss the point entirely. It was not a meal, it was a pharmaceutical-grade intervention designed for the human body under extreme duress. While other armies focused on providing basic sustenance, enough calories to keep a man alive and walking, American military scientists and nutritionists were engaged in a far more sophisticated endeavor. They were not just fighting hunger, they were engineering performance. The K-ration and its counterparts represented a revolutionary application of nutritional science, transforming the soldier from a biological organism subject to decay into an optimized combat system. The foundational principle was moving beyond crude calorie counting. Yes, the rations provided a substantial caloric load, anywhere from 2,800 to 3,600 calories depending on the specific meal and type. But the source and timing of those calories were meticulously calculated. The body under combat stress is a machine burning fuel at an incredible rate, subjected to immense physical trauma, psychological shock, and sleep deprivation. The ration was the customized fuel for this machine. The core of this science was macronutrient engineering. Each component played a specific, timed role in maintaining a soldier's combat effectiveness. The hardtack biscuits and other cereal components were complex carbohydrates. These are the body's preferred source of long-term, sustained energy. They break down slowly, providing a steady release of glucose into the bloodstream, preventing the energy crashes associated with simple sugars. This was the baseline fuel for the long march, the extended patrol, the hours spent digging a foxhole. It was the nutritional equivalent of the slow, steady burn of coal in a furnace. But combat is not a steady state. It is a series of violent, explosive bursts, a charge across open ground, the frantic effort to outflank an enemy position, the sheer physical exertion of hand-to-hand fighting. For these moments, the body requires instant, accessible energy. This is where the simple sugars came into play. The D-ration chocolate bar, the fruit bars, and the sugar cubes were the high-octane fuel. They provided a rapid spike in blood glucose, a swift chemical signal to the brain and muscles that energy was immediately available. This was the nutritional equivalent of a nitro boost, a short-term but critical advantage in a life-or-death moment. Perhaps the most crucial scientific consideration was protein and fat. In a state of constant physical exertion and caloric deficit, the human body begins to catabolize its own muscle tissue for energy. This leads to rapid physical deterioration, weakness, and a compromised immune system. The American rations were deliberately packed with protein from the meat hash, the ham, and the cheese product, and fats from the same sources and the chocolate. These macronutrients are essential for muscle repair, satiety, the feeling of fullness, and the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. The fats, in particular, provided a dense, concentrated energy source that was crucial for thermoregulation in cold environments and for sustaining soldiers during periods when other food was unavailable. They were the body's rebuilding and insurance policy, consumed at the end of the day to repair the damage of the last 24 hours and prepare for the next. Beyond macronutrients, the rations were a sophisticated delivery system for micronutrients and stimulants, the additives that turned food into a performance-enhancing system. The inclusion of salt was not merely for taste, it was a critical electrolyte. In the sweltering heat of the Pacific or the deserts of North Africa, a soldier could lose lethal amounts of sodium through sweat, leading to cramping, heat exhaustion, and death. The salt packet was a life-saving medical intervention. The caffeine in the chocolate and the instant coffee was a centrally acting stimulant, a direct pharmacological tool to combat the most dangerous enemy after the foe, fatigue. Fatigue impairs judgment, slows reaction times, and kills situational awareness. By providing a standardized dose of caffeine, the ration was medicating the soldier against the debilitating effects of sleep deprivation, ensuring he remained alert and cognitively sharp on watch or during a critical operation. This was not a luxury, it was a force multiplier as tangible as a spare magazine of ammunition. This scientific approach stood in stark, brutal contrast to the nutritional philosophy of their enemies. The Japanese haishoku was primarily a bowl of carbohydrate, rice, with minimal protein and fat. It was fuel, but it was inefficient, incomplete fuel that led to vitamin deficiencies like beriberi and did little to prevent muscular atrophy. The German Eisern portion, iron ration, was primarily hardtack and preserved meat, lacking the variety and psychological components. They addressed hunger, the Americans addressed human performance. The science behind the ration was a silent, invisible advantage. The enemy could hear the artillery and see the aircraft, but they could not see the optimized glucose levels, the steady protein synthesis, or the heightened neural activity of the American soldier. He was not just fed, he was chemically and biologically optimized for the task at hand. The ration was the product of laboratories and research institutions, a triumph of applied science that understood a fundamental truth: the most important weapon system on the battlefield is the human body, and the US Army had developed the most advanced fuel in the world to power it. If the K-ration was the revolutionary, lightweight assault ration, the swift, tactical strike against hunger, then the C-ration was the heavy artillery of sustenance. It was the embodiment of a profound and demoralizing promise the Americans could make to their soldiers, a promise no other army could reliably keep: even here, at the very edge of hell, you can have a hot, recognizable meal. The C-ration moved beyond the scientific fuel of the K-ration into the realm of psychological comfort and normalcy. It wasn't just about optimizing a soldier. It was about reminding him that he was still a human being, connected to a world of kitchens and dining tables, even as the world around him dissolved into chaos. The physical heft of the C-ration was the first indicator of its different purpose. Where the K-ration was a compact cardboard box, the C-ration consisted of sturdy, heavy steel cans, 6 to a cardboard case. These were not the small, key-open tins of the K-ration, but substantial cans that felt like something from a grocery store back home. This weight communicated abundance and substance. Each meal consisted of one large can containing a main course and a smaller can containing an accessory, typically bread or crackers and a spread, along with a complementary item like candy or cigarettes. The very act of opening a C-ration felt more significant, more substantial, than the quicker process of unpacking a K-ration. The true genius of the C-ration, and the feature that most starkly differentiated it from the field rations of every other combatant nation, was its simplicity of preparation. The instructions were pictographic and required no language skills. A drawing showed the unopened can being placed directly into a fire or on a bed of hot coals. This was a logistical and tactical masterstroke. It eliminated the need for a field kitchen, pots, pans, or even a dedicated cook. Every soldier was his own kitchen. A small, concealed fire, a hobo stove made from a discarded can or a shallow pit, was all that was required. In a matter of minutes, the soldier could transform a cold, impersonal can into a steaming, hot meal. For the Japanese soldier, the act of cooking rice was a lengthy, vulnerable process that required substantial water and produced telltale smoke, often inviting mortar fire. For the American, heating his rations was a swift, simple, and relatively safe affair. This was convenience as a tactical advantage. The contents of those heated cans were designed to simulate, as closely as possible, a home-cooked meal. The menus had names that evoked stateside comfort: meat and vegetable stew, beans with pork, frankfurters and beans, ham and lima beans, infamously dubbed ham and motherfuckers by unimpressed GIs. When the can was opened after heating, the aroma that erupted was transformative. It was the rich, savory smell of a kitchen, a smell of roasted meat, simmered vegetables, and thick gravy. In an environment dominated by the stenches of cordite, decay, mud, and unwashed bodies, this aroma was a powerful sensory weapon against despair. It triggered deep-seated memories of home, family, and safety. It was a direct neural pathway to a reality beyond the war. The experience of eating was equally impactful. This was not a homogeneous paste or a simple collection of separate items. Their meat and vegetable stew contained distinguishable chunks of potato, carrot, and meat in a thick, brown gravy. Beans and pork offered a hearty, smoky, and satisfying combination. However gourmet these dishes may seem by modern standards, they were complete, balanced, and, most importantly, familiar. They provided the psychological satisfaction of a real meal, not just the biological satisfaction of fuel. This psychological operation was completed by the accessory can. Within it, a soldier might find not just hardtack, but more palatable crackers, a spread like jam or peanut butter, and, the crown jewel of the C-ration, a small can of fruit. The can of peaches or fruit cocktail, submerged in heavy, sweet syrup, was perhaps the single most potent morale item in the American inventory. The burst of sugary, fruity flavor was a direct assault on the grimness of the front lines. It was a taste of picnics, of childhood, of America untouched by war. To eat warm stew followed by cold, sweet peaches in a muddy foxhole was to experience a profound cognitive dissonance that actively reinforced what one was fighting for. The impact of this hot meal on the front lines cannot be overstated. For the American soldier, it was a daily ritual of reaffirmation. It was a tangible demonstration that his country could project its power and its care directly to him, no matter where he was. It broke the soul-crushing monotony of combat, providing not just a change of taste, but a moment of genuine comfort and normalcy. For the enemy who discovered these rations, as our title suggests, the C-ration was an object of profound shock. It revealed an enemy who did not merely endure the privations of war, but who had the logistical arrogance to overcome them. The C-ration was more than food, it was a symbol of an unbridgeable gap. It proved that the Americans fought not with a spirit hardened by deprivation, but with a spirit sustained by the unwavering, tangible support of the nation behind them. The ability to provide a hot meal to every single soldier, every single day, was not a minor logistical detail. It was the ultimate flex of industrial muscle, and it sent a clearer message than any propaganda leaflet: we are here, we are well fed, and we are not going anywhere. The American ration's triumph was not limited to its mastery of macronutrients and its engineering of hot meals. Woven into the very fabric of the K and C rations was a deeper, more insidious layer of strategic genius. Beyond the proteins, carbohydrates, and fats designed to fuel the body, the ration contained a carefully calibrated arsenal of psychoactive substances and psychological tools designed specifically to fuel the mind and manage the human spirit under unimaginable stress. This was the psychological warfare kit, and its primary weapons were sugar, caffeine, and the deliberate simulation of normalcy. While enemy armies relied on ideology and discipline to sustain morale, the United States had industrialized the process, turning mood management into a logistical equation. The most direct weapon in this arsenal was sugar. In the form of the D-ration chocolate bar, hard candies, or the syrupy fruit cocktail in the C-ration, sugar was a deliberate, neurological intervention. Its effect was immediate and potent. Upon consumption, it triggered a rapid release of dopamine in the brain's reward center. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of pleasure, satisfaction, and motivation. In the context of the front lines, a world of constant fear, exhaustion, and horror, this chemical signal was a lifeline. For the few minutes that a piece of chocolate dissolved on the tongue, the war receded. The sharp, bittersweet flavor was a sensory anchor to a safer, more pleasant reality. It was a manufactured moment of happiness, a brief but powerful respite from the grinding despair of combat. This was not an accidental benefit, it was a calculated strategy to combat the psychological attrition that could cripple a unit as effectively as enemy fire. A soldier experiencing this dopamine hit was, quite literally, having his morale chemically reinforced. Alongside sugar worked its powerful ally, caffeine. Found in the chocolate and, most prominently, in the instant coffee, caffeine was the weapon against the mind's most dangerous enemy, fatigue. Exhaustion on the battlefield is not mere sleepiness, it is a critical vulnerability. It dulls reaction times, clouds judgment, impairs decision-making, and kills situational awareness. A tired soldier is a dead soldier, and a tired unit is a defeated unit. The American military understood this at a physiological level. By providing a standardized, reliable dose of a central nervous system stimulant, they were medicating their soldiers against this threat. The caffeine in a packet of instant coffee or a D-ration bar was a direct countermeasure to the life-threatening fog of fatigue. It sharpened focus, restored alertness, and provided the mental clarity needed to spot an enemy ambush, call in accurate artillery, or simply stay awake on a lonely, terrifying watch. But its power went beyond the purely chemical. The ritual of preparing the coffee, heating the water, mixing the granules, was a small, comforting piece of civilian routine. It was a moment of self-care and normalcy, a psychological bulwark against the chaos. The message was clear: even here, you can have your coffee break. The third pillar of this psychological kit was the simulation of choice and variety. The monolithic nature of other armies' rations, the endless rice bowls of the Japanese, the repetitive Eisern portion of the Germans, was itself a tool of psychological oppression. Monotony breeds apathy, resentment, and a sense of inescapable grind. The American system, by contrast, offered a semblance of autonomy. A soldier with a C-ration could choose to eat his stew first or save his fruit cocktail for last. He could trade his cigarettes for a comrade's can of peaches. This tiny, almost trivial act of choice was profoundly important in a world where every other aspect of life was governed by strict orders and the tyranny of circumstance. It was a defense against the feeling of being a mere cog in a machine. It was a reminder of individual agency. Furthermore, the accessories, the cigarettes, the chewing gum, were not frivolous additions. The cigarettes, beyond their nicotine content which acted as a calming agent for frayed nerves, provided a social ritual. The sharing of a light, the collective exhalation of smoke during a lull in fighting, these were moments of bonding and shared humanity. The chewing gum offered a simple, lasting flavor and an outlet for nervous energy and stress. When a Japanese soldier discovered these components, the revelation was devastating. He saw that his enemy was not relying on abstract concepts of imperial spirit to maintain fighting efficiency. Instead, the Americans had a material, scientific answer for the erosion of the human spirit. For every low, there was a sugar rush. For every moment of fatigue, there was a caffeine boost. For every wave of despair, there was a piece of chewing gum or a cigarette to steady the hands. The American ration system acknowledged the terrible fragility of morale and attacked its decline with the same systematic efficiency it applied to any other military problem. The enemy soldier was left with the chilling realization that he was fighting not just men, but a system that understood and manipulated the very chemistry of the human brain to sustain its will to fight. His spirit was expected to overcome hunger. The American soldier's morale was chemically and psychologically reinforced 3 times a day. In the end, the ration box proved to be the most effective propaganda tool of the war, not because of the words printed on it, but because of the direct, physiological impact of its contents. It demonstrated that the battle for the stomach was, irrevocably, the battle for the mind. To fully comprehend the revolutionary nature of the American field ration, one must abandon the Allied perspective and step into the worn, cracked boots of the enemy soldier. For the hardened veterans of the Imperial Japanese Army, the discovery of American K and C rations was not merely a welcome find of food, it was a catastrophic data point, a piece of intelligence that shattered their entire understanding of the war and their place in it. The contents of those boxes presented a devastating comparison that unfolded on 3 distinct levels: the physical, the psychological, and the philosophical. This comparison did more than highlight a difference in quality, it revealed a difference in the very essence of how 2 nations valued human life in wartime. The physical contrast was immediate and humiliating. The Japanese field ration, the haishoku, was a study in minimalist survival. Its core was a bowl of uncooked rice, about 2 go per man. This was not a ready-to-eat meal but a promise of one, contingent on finding safe water, sufficient time, and a hidden location to build a cooking fire, a luxury that often proved fatal. The rice was occasionally supplemented by a single, intensely salty pickled plum, an umeboshi, meant to preserve the rice and provide electrolytes, but offering little nutritional value. Sometimes there was a small piece of dried fish or canned goods, but as the war progressed and American submarines strangled supply lines, these vanished entirely. The reality for soldiers like Sergeant Tanaker's unit was a descent into primitive foraging, digging for edible roots, roasting grubs, and hunting lizards for their stringy meat. Their bodies were not fueled, they were slowly consuming themselves. Against this reality, the American ration was a shocking spectacle of abundance and technology. Where the Japanese soldier saw a single, plain bowl of rice, the American soldier had multiple courses. The main can of meat hash or stew was a dense brick of protein and fat, ready to eat cold or heated simply. The hardtack biscuits were durable complex carbohydrates. The chocolate bar was pure energy. The coffee was a stimulant. The fruit cocktail was a sweet dessert. The accessories, cigarettes, gum, sugar, were unthinkable luxuries. But the comparison went beyond the menu. The Japanese soldier carried the weight of his own kitchen, uncooked rice, a personal hango mess tin, and often a portable stove. The American soldier carried a self-contained, lightweight kit that required no additional equipment. This was a comparison between a system of burden and a system of convenience, between an army that added to its soldiers' load and an army that worked to lighten it. This physical disparity bled directly into a psychological chasm. The Japanese military doctrine was built on the concept of Yamato Damashi, the transcendent Japanese spirit that could overcome any material disadvantage. Hunger, therefore, was not a logistical failure to be solved, but a spiritual trial to be endured. Low morale was a personal failing, a sign of a weak spirit. The solution was not to improve conditions, but to strengthen discipline and devotion to the emperor. The soldier was a disposable instrument of the state's will. The American ration system presented a complete rejection of this philosophy. It was a tangible contract between the nation and its soldier. Every component whispered a different message: you are valuable. We will invest in you. We will care for your body and your mind. The variety of the rations fought monotony, a direct assault on the apathy that plagued undersupplied units. The sugar in the chocolate and fruit was a deliberate, neurological antidote to despair. The caffeine in the coffee was a tool to medicate against the lethal impairment of fatigue. The cigarettes were a chemical and ritualistic calming agent. The Americans had identified the psychological stressors of combat and developed a material solution for each one. They treated morale not as a mystical quality, but as a resource to be managed and replenished, like ammunition or fuel. For the Japanese soldier conducting this comparison, the conclusion was inescapable and devastating. He was not just hungry, he was confronted with the fact that his enemy was systematically cared for in ways he could only dream of. The American soldier's morale was engineered and mass-produced. His own was expected to be endlessly self-generating from an ever-depleting physical and spiritual reserve. The ration demonstrated that the Americans fought with the confidence of being supported, the Japanese fought with the desperation of being abandoned. Ultimately, their comparison became philosophical, striking at the core of their sacrifice. The American ration was a testament to the power of the individual. It catered to personal preference, offered choice, and acknowledged the soldier's need for comfort and cognitive sharpness. It represented a system designed to preserve the individual's fighting capability and, by extension, his life. The Japanese ration, in its stark austerity, was a testament to the insignificance of the individual. The system was paramount, the soldier was expendable. His hunger was proof of his devotion. Holding the American ration, the Japanese soldier was forced to ask a terrifying question: how long can spirit alone hold out against an enemy whose spirit is constantly, scientifically, and logistically reinforced? The answer, written in the empty cans of stew and the wrappers of chocolate, was that it couldn't. The real secret weapon wasn't the food itself, but the demoralizing, crystal-clear realization it delivered to the enemy: they were not just outgunned, but outproduced, outthought, and outcared for. The most devastating comparison was not between the rations, but between the two futures they represented. One ration promised continued strength and eventual victory. The other promised only continued deprivation and inevitable defeat. In that moment of understanding, Their will to fight, the very Yamato Damashi they relied upon, began to crumble, not from a bullet's impact, but from the soul-crushing weight of a simple, irrefutable truth. The empty ration cans and colorful wrappers scattered across 1,000 Pacific islands and European fields were more than just litter, they were the terminal points of a system so vast and powerful its full scope defied human comprehension. While the world watched the dramatic movements of armies and fleets, the true war, the war that ultimately decided the outcome, was being won by an invisible army of logisticians, engineers, factory workers, and farmers. Their humble K and C ration was not merely a meal, it was the final, tangible expression of the most potent weapon in the American arsenal, a logistical capability so overwhelming it bordered on the magical. This was the invisible backbone of victory, a triumph of organization and industrial output that none of America's adversaries could hope to match. To appreciate the miracle of an American soldier eating a can of stew in a foxhole, one must trace its journey. It began not in a kitchen, but in a boardroom and a laboratory, where nutritionists and military planners designed the perfect balance of calories, nutrients, and shelf stability. From there, it moved to the factories of the American heartland, where endless lines of automated machinery stamped out millions of identical cans. These factories operated on a scale unimaginable to the Axis powers. They were supplied by farms that stretched to the horizon, producing the wheat, beef, potatoes, and fruits that would be transformed into combat fuel. This was the first layer of the logistical miracle, the unstoppable productive capacity of a continent-sized nation operating at full industrial tilt. The next phase of the journey was even more perilous. The canned rations were boxed, palletized, and loaded onto the holds of Liberty ships and Victory ships, vessels being launched at a rate faster than German U-boats could sink them. These ships ran a gauntlet across thousands of miles of submarine-infested oceans, protected by a naval and air umbrella that America alone could provide. Upon reaching a combat theater, the real magic of American military engineering took over. If there was no port, the U.S. Navy and Army Corps of Engineers built one, floating in artificial mulberry harbors or carving facilities out of pristine coastline. The rations were unloaded by stevedores and transported to massive, city-like distribution depots, where they were sorted and entered the final, most vulnerable leg of their journey. This was their last mile of logistics, a phrase that belies its immense complexity. From the depot, the rations were loaded onto trucks that drove along roads built by engineers, transported to airfields for aerial delivery, or loaded onto landing craft for the final run to the beach. They were then pushed forward to battalion, then company, then platoon supply dumps, until finally, they were handed out to individual soldiers. This entire chain, stretching from a farm in Iowa to the front lines of Okinawa or the hedgerows of Normandy, had to remain unbroken. A single break, a sunk ship, a destroyed bridge, a overrun supply dump, could mean disaster. The fact that this chain held, day after day, across multiple global fronts, is one of the greatest achievements in military history. This logistical prowess provided the American military with its most critical strategic advantage, strategic mobility and relentless operational tempo. A German or Japanese unit, once it advanced beyond its supply lines, was effectively finished. Its momentum would stall as it ran out of fuel, ammunition, and food. The American Army, by contrast, was a self-contained, moving ecosystem. Its supplies flowed forward as reliably as the tide. This allowed for operations that were simply impossible for the enemy. The rapid advance across France after Operation Cobra, the island-hopping campaign across the vast distances of the Pacific, these were not just tactical victories, they were logistical triumphs. The enemy could not comprehend the speed of the American advance because they could not comprehend the system that made it possible. For the Axis soldier, the appearance of American rations deep behind what should have been severed supply lines was a psychological blow as potent as an artillery barrage. It demonstrated that nowhere was safe, and that the Americans possessed a supernatural ability to project power. The Japanese, in particular, who often relied on a strategy of cutting enemy supply lines to defeat numerically superior forces, found their core strategic assumption invalidated. They could isolate an American unit temporarily, but the relentless flow of supplies, including, tellingly, fresh rations, would inevitably resume, often delivered by airdrop. This shattered the defensive logic of their prolonged campaigns. The ultimate expression of this logistical dominance was not in the delivery of the extraordinary, but in the relentless, boring reliability of the ordinary. The true power was not that an American soldier could get a can of fruit cocktail, but that he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would get one. This unshakable faith in the system behind him was a force multiplier. It freed his mind from the primal anxiety of scarcity that plagued his opponents. He could focus entirely on the mission, secure in the knowledge that his next meal, his next cigarette, his next cup of coffee, was already accounted for. His enemy, by contrast, was constantly preoccupied with the question of his own survival, his will to fight eroded by the constant, degrading struggle to find his next mouthful of food. In the final analysis, the story of the American ration is the story of the war. The P-51 Mustang, the Sherman tank, and the Essex-class aircraft carrier were the glittering tip of the spear. But the shaft that drove that spear forward, with unstoppable force, was made of canned stew, instant coffee, and chocolate bars. It was built in factories, shipped across oceans, and delivered into the hands of the soldier by the greatest logistical enterprise the world had ever seen. The invisible backbone of victory was not a secret weapon, but a simple, profound truth: the nation that can best feed, supply, and sustain its soldiers on a global scale is the nation that will inevitably prevail. The ration was the proof that the arsenal of democracy was not a slogan, but a living, breathing, and utterly relentless reality. Throughout the annals of military history, the narrative of victory has been written in the language of technological supremacy, tactical genius, and raw, unyielding courage. We celebrate the brilliance of commanders and the awe-inspiring power of new weapons. Yet, in the cataclysmic struggle of World War II, a more profound, more fundamental truth emerged, one that was digested rather than deployed. The ultimate American weapon, the one that consistently and inexorably broke the enemy's will and secured victory, was not a piece of machinery or a secret plan. It was the simple, undeniable power of a full stomach. This was the weapon that fueled all others, the strategic advantage that could not be countered by any amount of fanatical spirit or defensive fortification. The logic is elemental, rooted in the basic biology of human performance. A soldier is a human system, and that system requires constant, high-quality fuel. A starved soldier is a compromised weapon. His muscles atrophy, his reaction time slows, his immune system fails, and his mind becomes clouded by a fog of fatigue and despair. He becomes a liability to himself and his comrades. The Japanese military doctrine, with its emphasis on Yamato Damashi, fundamentally misunderstood this reality. It believed that the human spirit could be trained to transcend biological necessity. The American approach was brutally pragmatic and scientifically sound. They understood that courage is the first casualty of starvation. By ensuring every soldier was not just fed, but optimally nourished, the United States fielded an army of soldiers who were, on average, physically stronger, mentally sharper, and more resilient than their adversaries. The full stomach was the foundation upon which all other combat skills were built. A well-fed soldier can march farther, fight longer, and think clearer than his hungry counterpart. It was the most basic, yet most overlooked, force multiplier. But the power of the full stomach extended far beyond the physiological. It was a psychological sledgehammer. In the brutal, dehumanizing environment of war, where a man is reduced to a cog in a vast, murderous machine, the act of receiving a satisfying, varied, and thoughtfully prepared meal was in profound affirmation of individual worth. The American ration was a tangible contract between the nation and its soldier. It said, "You are not disposable. We value you. We are investing in your well-being because we need you to win." This message, delivered 3 times a day, built a bedrock of morale that was resistant to the daily horrors of combat. The enemy, by contrast, often received a message of callous indifference. The Japanese soldier, subsisting on a handful of rice, understood that his life was a cheap resource to be expended. This disparity in care created a fundamental asymmetry in willpower. One army fought with the confidence of being supported, the other fought with the desperation of being abandoned. This psychological warfare was waged with specific, targeted tools. The full stomach wasn't just full of calories, it was full of dopamine and caffeine. The sugar in the chocolate and fruit cocktail provided a direct, neurological boost, a fleeting moment of pleasure in a world of misery. The caffeine in the coffee and chocolate was a pharmacological intervention against fatigue, sharpening the mind when it mattered most. The variety of the meals, the very existence of a dinner versus a supper, fought the soul-crushing monotony that eroded the spirit of soldiers fed the same meager rations day after day. The enemy had no counter for this. They could not replicate the industrial output, nor could they replicate the scientific understanding of human morale. They could only watch as their own spirit dwindled while the American will to fight was systematically, logistically reinforced. The final, and perhaps most decisive, aspect of this ultimate weapon was its demonstration of unassailable logistical power. A full stomach on the front lines was the end product of the most formidable military enterprise in human history. It represented the triumphant convergence of American agriculture, industrial mass production, maritime shipping, and engineering prowess. Every can of stew eaten in a muddy foxhole was a direct challenge to the enemy's entire strategic worldview. It proved that the Americans could project power and sustain it indefinitely, anywhere on the globe. For the Japanese soldier, who discovered these rations deep in a jungle far from any port, the message was clear: your efforts to cut our supply lines are futile. We are not an army that can be starved into submission. We are a force of nature, as relentless and inevitable as the tide. In the end, the tanks, the planes, and the ships were the glittering instruments of victory, but the full stomach was the cause of it. It was the weapon that powered the man who operated the machine, that sustained the morale of the army that held the line, and that ultimately convinced the enemy of the hopelessness of their cause. The story of the American ration is the story of World War II in microcosm. It is the story of a nation that won not merely by outfighting its enemies, but by outthinking and outproducing them. It proved that the most potent weapon is not always the one that destroys, but very often the one that sustains. The ultimate weapon was not a device that created an empty stomach in the enemy, but a system that guaranteed a full one for its own soldiers. Victory was not just delivered by the bullet, but by the can opener.